if I put
All right, we're preparing. The meeting is being live streamed. Awesome. All right, it's setting up. All right, we're live.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, welcome to our webinar Wednesdays for Native Heritage Month. We're really excited to have new conversations that have been popping up in conversations all over the place recently, and it's bystanders in Indian country and in tribal communities. So today we're going to talk about bystander, what that means in family, what that means in community. But before we get started, I want to do introductions and then pass it to Nicole for a welcome. So we have, I'll go alphabetically. Angelica, do you want to pop on and just say hello and tell us about yourself? Thank you.
Hello, yeah, bonjour everyone. My name is Angelica O'Leary. I am the Membership and Outreach Coordinator here at MIWSAC, and I'll be here supporting with a little bit of tech in the background and popping in here and there. And then if there are certain points that, when I want to kind of jump in the conversation, I will make sure to do so as well. And I'll also be monitoring the chat, and we'll get those who are interested, streaming live through our Facebook. If you have any comments or questions, we'll make sure to get those said to our facilitators and our co-hosts. So that's me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Angelica. And Carmen O'Leary is with us today. Carmen, do you want to do a quick intro?
You're muted, Carmen.
sorry about that. Carmen O'Leary with Native Women's Society out here in the middle of nowhere with not very good reception. So if you guys start going in and out, I'm just going to take my video off, okay?
Awesome. Thank you, Carmen. And Christine Davidson.
Bonjour. Iwatayashi Kindigo, Magizian Dodame, Gawa Babaganika Gishkonigan in Donjiba. I'm Christine Davidson in English. I'm Kiwatayashi Eagle Clan. I'm up here in the White Earth Nation. It's a beautiful fall day. Sun is still out, shining. And I'm with the Minnesota Indian Women Sexual Assault. And I'm super excited to be having this conversation here with everybody. Miigwech.
Wopila, thank you, Christine. And Jolene, do you want to pop on and just say hello? Introduce yourself.
Of course. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jolene Engle-King. I am also with Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition, and like Angelica, I will be primarily in the background, but I'll be popping on here or there. And I'm really excited for this much needed conversation.
And Miss Linda Thompson, you want to pop on?
Hi, and welcome. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for attending and participating. I have lit some medicine, and hopefully we'll be starting off in a good way with a balanced heart and mind. Thank you, Rebecca.
And Nicole Matthews is with us today.
Good afternoon, everyone. Manidu Baneshikwe, Indigenous, Nigisin Dodane, Gawa Babaganakagan Dunjiba. My name is Nicole Matthews. I'm the Executive Director at the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition. Happy to be here with you all today, and my people are from White Earth.
Awesome. I'm Bethu Washday. Good day. I'm Rebecca Baylog. I'm with Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition. And I'm happy to be here with you all today to talk about some really important topics about bystanders and our families and communities and how we operate through this. I do some of the sex trafficking work at MIWSAC, sex trafficking in Indian country in Alaska. So I'm really happy to be here with you all today. And we have Miss Cinnamon Banky too. Cinnamon, do you want to do an introduction and just say hello before we get started?
Sure. My name's Cinnamon Banky. I'm Bide-Wakitin, Dakota from Mendota, Minnesota. And I am also with MIWSAC and really just looking forward to our conversation today. Thank you.
Awesome. And Nicole, did you want to do a brief welcome and share a little bit about what we're doing here today?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, welcome everyone. You know, we really wanted this to be a conversation, and we have many conversations amongst ourselves at MIWSAC. We have conversations with our tribal coalition relatives and with people around the country about this issue. But we wanted to have a conversation with you all, really, as we dig into what is this, this issue around bystanders. You know, we hear stories in the media. For instance, the story that we heard out of Pennsylvania last month of a woman who was sexually assaulted on a train, and people watched and they filmed it, but nobody called 911 and nobody assisted in any way. So, you know, we want to have that conversation because we know this happens. We know this happens in reservation and tribal communities. We know this happens in urban communities. We know this happens in our families. And we know this happens in leadership and in politics and in so many different areas. So we will spend each week, each Wednesday, on a different piece of this topic. And there will be, you know, additional people that will be joining us in the weeks coming. So we will have Tammy Giroux from the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center, and we will have Leanne Guy from now Southwest Indigenous Women's Coalition. And we invite all of you who are watching to join in the conversation, to add your comments, questions on the Facebook Live chat, and to contribute as we all join in this conversation over the next few weeks.
Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, so like I had mentioned earlier in the opening, this conversation keeps popping up in different meetings and webinars, new grantee orientation, NCAI, MIWSAC trainings, when we attend other conferences and webinars. It keeps bubbling up to the surface. And it's not new, right? We've known this has gone on for so long, and it's hard to navigate. How do we create leadership opportunities? How do we create safety within families when there's this expectation, traditional values? When we talk about decolonizing, women and children are sacred. Women are sacred, right? But yet we have situations in Philly, like Nicole shared. It happens every day in Indian country and outside of Indian country. This is not specific to Native communities, so we want to say that. So I guess the first question is, what does this look like? What is the definition of a bystander? Is there better language that we could be using to identify this problem when it's our family members? And going back to that traditional value like loyalty, survivalism, right? All the things that are part of that intergenerational trauma and history. How do we come forward and keep our other family members safe? Are there any thoughts or ideas about defining what a bystander is, just to get started around any of that? You want to call in? Oh, Cinnamon?
Well, when I think of a bystander, there's a couple different things that I look at. And one is it definitely could be a relative or a friend, but I also think of who is in the proximity of what is happening during that time. And so I mean, we have that. We have friends and family, the extended bystander. And then there's a couple different types that we look at also. So I think for today, focusing on maybe those bystanders, those immediate people that are in proximity of what is happening. And so if we think about what Nicole shared, the train, the sexual assault that happened on the train when people were around, you know, if we think of something happening right next to us or what we can see and hear happening, we need to look at that as bystander and that immediate bystander response, right? Which really ultimately becomes a trauma response, you know, depending on what's happening, whether it's a comment or something physical, right?
Cinnamon, I was thinking when you were talking about being a bystander, I think we are the bystanders. We are all the bystanders, right? You, me, every single one of us. And we have varying degrees of opportunities on what actions we're going to take, right? And I think we have all learned or been conditioned to not say something. And we've done it in little ways, in big ways, and through many years of kind of social conditioning, right? And so what does it take to uproot the social conditioning and to break through that individualism or that individuality? Or, you know, we've been taught, that's none of my business. I got to mind my own business here. And what does it take to interrupt our own fear and unknown? We don't know what's going to happen, right? Because there could be legitimate danger by interrupting violence around us, right? And can be serious. I mean, it can be all the way to death, right? So there's all the reasons that we kind of have fear of interrupting when we see things around us. So I guess that's what I'm thinking about, is how do we make sure to keep it personal and break through that individualism and be in community, like authentic relatives in community with one another. Yeah.
I also think that, you know, when you were saying like it's all of us, I agree. And also the other thing is that, you know, it oftentimes triggers our own trauma. And so then you go into then it's like a flashback, right? You get into your own triggers and then it becomes the fight, flight, or freeze. And sometimes if you've experienced similar violence, you just freeze and do nothing, right? Or you want to run the other way. So it's not only fear of real and perceived threats of violence, which is a reality when you interrupt violence, but our own sort of triggers through that as well.
Yeah, and you know, speaking to that event that had happened on that train, when I think of being like a bystander and like the atmosphere and the environment of a situation when you're in like a public space, you're kind of like looking, I mean, you know, there's been situations where I've been a bystander too, and I've looked to see who else is going to jump in. If there's so many people here and there's so many people in the space, kind of looking, well, someone's going to do it. So, you know, I shouldn't do it. Or thinking like, if I do step up, who else is going to step up with me? And so thinking about, am I going to be courageous enough to make the first move? And then also looking for, you know, that safety net if I need extra help. And so there's a lot of different ways in where being a bystander can affect you. And I know that when we're in large spaces, it's harder to stick up because we think someone else is going to make that move, and really it's up to us. So just wanted to add that piece.
And another piece, going back to times of survival and family loyalty, where families are very tight knit, like in our immediate proximity, it may not be like on the train or the violence right in front of us, but sometimes it's a long like years of abuse. And we know that our uncle or our cousin or, you know, any gender, it's not gender specific here, that it can be our own family. And I think each one of us could tell stories about what retaliation looks like when it's a family against a family, right? But I don't want to continue speaking on that. I want to, Carmen, did you want to chime in too about like, what is bystanderism and is there better language to use for that? Or what does that mean to you?
You know, I never really thought about having another word for that. You know, out in Indian country, that might look different than those people on the train. I don't know what you would call that. I'm thinking about a couple of different situations where I don't think I could have sat still and let some of the things happen that happened. One thing in particular, and I know that this is all around sexual assault, but I was a child protection service worker at one time. And one of the things that I had noticed was, you know, when I went into a lot of homes within the tribe, and I had to remove children for whatever reason, a lot of adults just sat there and let me do that because there was this history of removing kids. And because I worked for the state, I also removed kids from non-Indian homes. And most of them homes, when you removed a kid, you went with law enforcement because you knew that it was not going to be easy. They owned them kids. You know, they had a whole different sense of that. But we had these generations of kids being taken away, you know? So what is that? You know, is it like a learned, you're not going to be able to do anything about this right now, but you need to survive this so you can take care of it later? What is that? You know, that's not really bystander, but I don't really have the word for it.
Yeah, that's really true. It does show up. It shows up in child welfare, domestic violence, sexual violence, and then trafficking. I'm going to give a shout out to a colleague of ours, Jessica Desmond Solomon, and just share some of her words that if you are on our other events, you've heard this many times. But with trafficking, she says the traffickers and recruiters are everywhere all the time. They're always present. And some people don't know what to look for. And I think, Christine, you had mentioned it a couple times, like we're in this movement, we understand the basic language and the basic tools. Like we have privilege in this movement doing the work. So we know what to look for. If it's a little bit more insidious and, you know, not obvious, like what happened in Philly. But Jessica says, if they're going to be everywhere, those recruiters, that we have to be everywhere too and be recruiting our own interventionists or people that can know how to operate, know the language, know what to look for. And that I guess would be continued education and outreach so people know what to look for. And it makes me think of, gosh, I learned this, so many years ago, and I know we've all heard it, but if you're in a location, an alley or wherever, you don't yell help because people don't run to help. But if you yell fire, people will run to fire. So there's all of those things too. Anyone else have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, while we were talking too, I was thinking about, so there's something that's a lot of threads that I'm hearing about. So there's this, we're talking about being a bystander in community or in family, doesn't matter where we're at, and we're having to interrupt habits around being silent or minding our own business. But there's also something that I'm chewing on, and I don't know how to word it, but it's almost like people assume that because we're in a sexual violence movement or we're talking about trafficking or domestic violence or all the things, that we're the ones who have to take the lead and do the stuff, right? But when in reality, it's all of us. And there's a certain kind of person who is going to step up and interrupt. You know, Nicole, you and I were talking, or all of us were talking that one day about, you saw somebody hitting their kid. You know, I bet you we've probably all seen somebody hitting their kid someplace. And I have my own story about that, being in a Walmart washroom and the little kid was crying and the mom was really mad and hitting her kid. And so how do we interrupt and feel comfortable and have thick enough skin to take the, take the wrath of the person who is their violence is being interrupted. So what does that look like? And how do we normalize this idea that we are family, that we could and should, and it's not just women who should be interrupting. It's not just elders, right? Like it's everybody. I don't know, just something like that I'm chewing on. All of us have to find our way, whatever it looks like.
I agree. And I think too, Christine, when those situations, also, I think when you see something like that happen, you also are at the same time when you decide whether you're going to respond or not respond. There was a moment, at least for me, where I thought about, will I be safe if I respond? Like, will I be able to handle the backlash from this mother if I respond, right? Because, and so I think you're making that assessment too. And nobody teaches someone how to respond, And so I had, in that situation with the woman who was abusing her child, I did respond. But in another situation, when I was traveling and I heard a woman being assaulted outside of my door, my hotel room door, and it was in the middle of the night and I was sleeping, I froze because it triggered me to a childhood memory. And I literally hid under my covers. And so it was a different response because I didn't feel safe in that moment and I didn't know what to do. So I froze. And so I think, same person, different situations. So we never, this in each situation, there's like this assessment of, will I be safe or not safe? And then there's the triggered, right? Like I was triggered back to an entirely different memory or situation.
The same thing happens in families, right? If you know that violence is happening in somebody's family, we have to make an assessment because there is a cost, right? As a survivor myself, there is a cost to tell. So we are making that assessment continuously under all these different circumstances. We're making that assessment, whether it's safe and how much support are we going to be believed? What kind of violence am I going to endure next, right? That assessment is really important. And how do we push the needle on what that looks like, on what that self-assessment is, and how can we better support one another to become more familiar, right? To have language, to have ideas, to have possibilities. Which is one of the main reasons we're having this conversation, right? Is how do we kind of just be in support of one another so we can get better at being better community members.
Christine, I think even if we look at where we're at in the community right now or currently, those of us that are doing advocacy, we've stepped out of our comfort zone. And when doing that, I will tell you, I had thoughts about what are my schoolmates, my classmates going to think of me? What is my family going to think of me? And am I going to lose family members' relationships because of my public stance on sexual violence? So I think at least for me, those are some of the things that I looked at as well. So.
One thing I can add, while I'm listening, in the background, and I'm thinking about, all these different situations where, we've all been bystanders, and, whether we're, young in school, growing up into adulthood or whatever, And I'm thinking about situations where, risk taking risks. And sometimes, whether we're experiencing the violence or we're witnessing violence happening in our community, or if it's just taking a risk with our own, development or self-development. One thing I can, think back on is unless, we're in a situation where we are a bystander and we get hurt, that's a different story. But most of the times in our life, we never regret the things we did do. We always regret the things we didn't do. And so those situations that we when we're thinking back on, like those little instances where you're going grocery shopping and you see, let's say, an altercation, or, you see different situations, whatever it is, whatever situation it is, like they kind of pop back into your head, like, oh, I should have done something, or I should have did something, or, and I also thinking about a safety plan, maybe when you're with your family or you're with your friends, thinking about what are we going to do together as either sisters, brothers and sisters, as a group of guy friends, like how are we going to interrupt that? Like, whether we're going out to a bar and we see whatever, like how are we going to be how are we going to stand up, and what's our safety plan? Whether one person in your group of friends or your family is in charge of, de-escalating with, maybe distracting or something like that. And then someone's, pushing away or, taking away the person who's being harmed and kind of separating them or something like that. But just thinking about different ways where you can create those safety nets and safety plans. And so it's a good way to think about creating a safety plan when you're in a group setting, whether you're going out with friends, going to a restaurant, or whatever it is. Because like I said, we a lot of the times in life, we always regret the things that we didn't do. So that just came to mind. And so just thank you for listening. And for those who are listening in the chat box on our Facebook Live, please feel free to, write in questions or comments, and we're going to make sure that we go ahead and share those, and then we can further discuss as well.
A couple of the words that I heard, I just love. One of my mentors uses the term healthy risks to make that assessment, like throwing back to Christine, assessing that the risks are healthy. And I love the idea of having a safety plan, and maybe we can segue into that next and talk about what that looks like. But my knee-jerk response is thinking about, I started in this movement as a survivor advocate. So I already had, I knew some things, but I still went through the big training. And in that big training, focusing specifically on domestic violence, is that if you're seeing an altercation, if you're witnessing violence, be careful how you get involved. Dial 911, pull them aside, see if you can be support. Because if it's not handled in a healthy risk or a good assessment, that survivor or victim may get even more abuse for that bystander interacting. So that's just a part of it too, right? And when we're talking about families, we know how unique that can be. The abuse that behind closed doors is significant. So maybe we should talk about how to safely, like, how do we do this? How do we raise more people to intervene around us in family and community, kind of like Angelica just mentioned? Develop a safety plan at home if it's safe. Any other thoughts on that? Or how to do so in community?
When I think of that, when I think of creating a safety plan, I also think of, in that moment, what are the barriers that I have for responding and for interrupting that behavior. And I know many times there's a fear of retaliation, especially in smaller communities versus urban areas. Fear of retaliation immediately and fear of retaliation later on. And those are the two things that pop into my head when I think of, well, what would stop somebody from interrupting that behavior? So.
Carmen, do you have some thoughts?
Well, we all live in littler communities, so I think that out here everybody knows everybody and everybody knows families, and retaliation can take all kinds of forms even if you don't know somebody. So yeah, it can look a lot different. I talk about this a lot in advocacy. And I don't know if I'm just taking off of what other people are saying, but we were discussing about like why bystanders don't get involved because of retaliation, right? Or am I just taking off of what somebody else is talking about? I'm sorry, I had to take a phone call for a second. But is that the topic right now? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was making sure I was tracking here. But one of the things, it can be anything from, if say it was a family member for, say, the REA out here, which would be the electrical bill, and maybe you're late, instead of just getting a notice on your door that your REA bill is late, you're going to get cut off, and you're going to get cut off late in the day. So you're going to at least spend one night with no electricity. I'm just using that for an example. I mean, retaliation can be real simple things like that, or not that would be simple, especially not in the wintertime. Or it can be, the Facebook stuff. I remember one young girl right after a young man got arrested for sexual assault, and the extended family just, they didn't, how do I want to say this? When a family has had several indictments into the federal court system, they know how to play it. And so that they're not like, they don't get indicted for tampering with a witness or harassing a federal witness. So they do it in other ways. Like all of a sudden Facebook is flooded with things like, if somebody lies about being sexually assaulted, she should have to be in prison for as long as he is. People that help out liars, they should have to do the sentence along with the liar, things like that. So they take to like the advocates, and they take to the victim, and they do it in mass. So when you talk about retaliation out here in our area, it's not a little thing, so it can be all of that kind of social stuff that, when you talk to the feds about it, they think, oh, well, it's no big deal, to, the little things where you come out in the morning to go to work and all your tires are slashed. Yeah, so that's very, very real. And in our small communities, it looks a little different. And there's a lot of support for the trauma dealers. I started calling them trauma dealers because everybody wants to do something about drug dealers. So I want to do something about trauma dealers.
Oh, smokes. I like that. Oh, go ahead, Cinnamon.
Well, I was just going to say, I really like that too. And looking at the difference, it is very different when we talk about in-person bystander and social media bystander. Completely different, completely different.
I'm really glad that was brought up. Oh, Carmen, go ahead.
And I can't even do anything about it because they unfriend me and block me because I definitely do something about it.
And this is rugged language, but this is just what it's called, but character assassination, right? Like, so we're talked about the family aspect and facing violence on the train, on the street, at home. And then that digital space, man, that can get insidious. And they are trauma dealers. There's like goons, man. Like someone's doing harm, and it's not even addressing that, I don't know, what do you call it, level 1 direct violence, but then you have the goons or trauma dealers that can be hundreds, sometimes thousands of people doing character assassination. And now you involve cancel culture, and that just adds a whole nother layer to it. And it's really awful. Sorry, just wanted to add that.
I mean, we've talked, as a staff about cancel culture and about the digital violence, right? Like these are conversations that keep coming up, and it's striking to me is how organized it has to be in order to, I don't know, like for the folks organizing to attack on Facebook in numbers like that, the organizing that it takes to do that, how can we flip the script to get folks to organize on behalf of survivors? And what is the fear in people's hearts that stops them from organizing on behalf of survivors rather than trying to minimize and invisibilize folks who are experiencing violence? I don't understand it. The struggle is real, man.
When Nicole was talking about the airport and being, the hotel and being on travel, I had experienced something similar at the airport. And all I could think of and seeing this woman yelling at this young child, and this child just like crying, and knowing our stress level when we travel to begin with. And all I could think of was that poor child, and the mother's having a meltdown. And I only had seen those two, and myself interrupting came natural to me. And, going up to the mom and saying, hey, you seem to be having a really tough day. Can I sit over here with your child? She was in the Starbucks line, so that was one clue. But she was okay with me taking her child off to the side and sitting at the table at the Starbucks in the airport so she could catch a minute to get her coffee and whatever it was. And that was an interruption that came natural to me, being a mom and knowing the stresses of being mom and traveling with children to begin with. So, I mean, that's a small interruption compared to when we talk about sexual violence, which includes comments and derogatory jokes and how we're treating or visually looking at people, right? We have that wide range of sexual violence. But on the other hand, I have assisted people in moving states away from their home and from their family because of retaliation. And, that's not to be minimized. It can be deadly sometimes. And it's a real fear. So, when we think about that immediate response, when we're there physically, and some of us have talked about taking a safety assessment, a brief safety assessment. Am I going to be okay if I physically intervene or step up? And I even think about a party that I was at as, a 20-year-old, and all of my friends are there, right? And all of a sudden someone is violent with their girlfriend, and I'm looking, and all of a sudden I hear what's happening, and I hear, no, don't interrupt, Cinnamon. And what did I do? I interrupted. And it stopped for that moment. And, saved, protected that young woman in that moment.
I want to thank you, Cinnamon. That is really smart and really brave. That was a healthy risk. When you have people that have your back and you're not alone on the train and everyone else is just recording, which is unimaginable. But I want to backtrack too. When our team kept hearing these things pop up, it was Nicole, she had to hop off to real quick. But our theme for today, family and communities. Next week, we have men and boys, all bystander. Then we're going to have isolated communities, including the Alaska villages. And then that last week, we're going to talk about popular folks, people in leadership positions. But like, where did all of this come from? The theme of this is, where is the love? When we love our communities and love our families and, indigenous love, native love, where is the love when we're allowing our family members to abuse their spouses, their partners, or get away with, we know on the drum, we know at the rodeo, we know at the powwow who's committing violence, and we see their goons or their trauma dealers, right? And how do we bring back the love of our community? Throwing back to the Beastie Boys, check yourself before you wreck yourself, right? Like, if you love your sibling, your best friend, your cousin, check yourself. Why are you doing this? I want you to be a better person. To me, that's decolonizing families, saying, I love you enough to tell you about yourself because you're doing wrong. And that seems to be too hard for a lot of folks. We got to somehow lift that up and make that the new normal. Sorry. Yeah.
Linda, did you jump on to add some thoughts?
I have a lot of thoughts about this. Throughout the conversation, I think that, it's in two different places when I think of family and community. And that is that there is a lot of embarrassment and shame. It's not just fear and what's happening, but from the person that's witnessing or hearing, or maybe heard secondhand. Like, maybe my cousin came and told me what happened over at my auntie's house, and I don't have any reason to doubt what she's saying, but a lot of our stuff is passed through conversations with people that we trust and people that we love. And it has to be, for some people, the risk has to be equal to the fear or what they assess as danger. And for some, it's got to be they can't listen to it anymore, or they don't care what happens. This can't happen anymore, especially when it comes to the molestation or the abuse of children or elders or vulnerable people. People could be a little more likely to speak up, but there might not be the resources. So we have to be involved in our communities to make sure that these conversations are happening and just not at the time of crisis. That we have plans as communities on how to address it. And we include other people in the community, whether it's CHR, community health representatives that work on behalf of outreach in our communities. If it's the nursing staff, the counselors, or the nurse at the school. If there is a community response, and the idea that I am not going to be penalized for telling what happened, or ostracized or assaulted. And that really is the risk for some people. But I've met many people that went beyond their own fear and knew that what they were saying and doing was right on behalf of another human being. I've also been the person who needed somebody to help and nobody helped. Even though they drove by or they listened and they heard, they were in the other room, they didn't do anything. And so for that, it feels really more isolating. And like what happened was okay, even though the person didn't like it. And there is the other part, when somebody is abusing their children, sometimes it is that a lot of times it's the overwhelm, not knowing what to do and not having the understanding of child development, and mostly being an abuse victim themselves. So what I was hearing when Cinnamon said, I asked, is there any way that I can help you? Because there's not going to be any change unless we offer up some kind of resources and acceptance of people that don't know how to handle their problems, their emotions, or their fears. And a lot of abusers have been abused, and that doesn't make it okay. But we have to have something else instead of just saying you did something wrong here. Because guess what? When it comes to child protection, there's not a lot of waiting lists for our children. There's a lot of children waiting for people, and a lot of times there's further harm that happens to them in those systems. So the more that we can be providing services, education, training, and support, the better off we'll be as community. And I was thinking of our Where is the Love during horrible trauma in our community. I was saying something very similar. And I'll tell you this, in this virtual circle and all of us looking, here is the love. So it's not where, we're right here. And there's a lot of us out here that love our people and love our families and love our lives. So we are here. So I'm just going to say that. And thank you for listening to all of this. I think about the abuse that's, from family member to family member. Oh, they said so-and-so did this and that. Well, I'll tell you, whenever you hear that kind of crap, those kind of trauma stories, and it involves a vulnerable person or a child, I would believe that. And those whispers cannot be ignored, because sometimes that's the only way that things get exposed for what they're doing and what they are. And never is it okay to hurt another person. It is always a choice, whether it's domestic violence, sexual violence, emotional, verbal, lateral violence in the workplace. You're making a choice, and it starts with how you're thinking. And we could continue to be a part of the pain, or we can bring in the support and the love and have other ideas. I'm sorry, before this call, I heard something really terrible, and I was just like this. So I had to light the medicine first for myself to get myself a little bit, and then listen. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. Another thought I had is, this is our, first webinar to kick off Native American Heritage Month. And, like when we're talking about like the whispers or like the silencing, like the being quiet, take it, and keep it quiet, hidden between, families and all that stuff. Like that was something that we were taught, whether it's in boarding school or whether by, like the colonizers. And so how are we going to like interrupt that and really bring in that true, like we talk about, with staff or our membership, is that tribal think. How are we going to think about holding each other accountable and breaking the silence to end and to make people feel comfortable, right? I mean, because really we're being quiet to make ourselves comfortable, but really we're uncomfortable because we're going to think back to those situations where we kept silent. So really it's just going to eat us up, and it's not going to be good for the person who's experiencing violence. And, we're also in some moments reliving that trauma that we've experienced too. So how can we be that sister, brother, uncle, auntie, grandmother, grandfather that we needed when we were in those situations? And like there's an energy to like secrecy. And so, and then when you, let's say you're interrupting violence, or you're interrupting, the frustration between a parent and their child or something. There's an energy that goes into that when you're seeing the bigger picture, or you're intervening in a positive, loving way. The energy doesn't die, it goes somewhere else, and it can help that other person to be strong enough to interrupt the next violence that they see because someone stood up for them. So, you know, everything is living around us. I mean, even this phone here, it's got energy to it. Whether I put good energy into it or bad energy, it's going to go out into the universe somewhere. You know, we're talking about media and tech, all that stuff. So it's just something to think about, and how we're going to pass that love on. And where is the love? It's within. So how are we going to move it forward?
Man, Angelica, I just got to say this really quick, that when you're talking about when we interrupt it and that energy moves forward, right? I think about, her name was Grace, Pat Grace. She was my English teacher in high school, and her radar was up. She knew something was wrong in our family, and she did her best to intervene at that time. She would like try to keep me after class. She would try to get me to write in a journal. She did all these things because her instinct was saying something wasn't right, but she didn't know how and didn't know what. But guess what? She's the person who she was a beacon of light in my life in the darkest times, right? And I have a few of those folks who were just that little beacon of light, because she knew something wasn't right and she was trying. That was enough for me at that time. When I disclosed my violence to Mom, she believed me the second I uttered the words. She didn't question it. She didn't doubt it. She believed me. And I believe that the best thing that we can do when somebody finds the courage to disclose is to believe them, right? And to interrupt anyway. It's a habit of white supremacy to have a right to comfort. Guess what? The person experiencing the violence is not comfortable. Really, we're gonna like pretend that our comfort is more important than getting so I don't know, it kind of makes me a little bit mad. I mean, it's a very human emotion to be fearful about making, you know, a choice and all the things, but the people who are experiencing the violence need somebody to intervene, and we do need to do it safely. And even if the situation doesn't change miraculously in that particular second that we intervene, that person knows that somebody somewhere saw something and is willing to speak up. And that makes all the difference sometimes. That changes the trajectory of our journey, our spiritual journey after that, right? Yeah, good stuff.
You know, you guys, this morning I wrote a thank you note to Tanya Hall. Some of you might know her, some of you might not. She's Auntie Beatrice. Anyway, a couple nights ago, she put a long, I think it's like an hour long, telling her story of abuse when she was like, 16 to 20. And I just really am impressed by what she shared, because, it's something that a lot of the young girls are going to be able to relate to, because, a lot of people watch her. But she didn't just talk about how terrible it was. She talked about this kind of thing, like people in the powwow circuit were saying to him, well, what are you doing with somebody that's still dancing in the teen class and you're an adult? Because this was a 30-year-old man with 4 kids and she was 16. There were people reaching out and trying to be protective. And she sees that now. And she identifies how her mom wasn't protective, allowing him to come into her house as a teenager. And so different parts of her story, she talks about that. So this morning I wrote her a letter or an email about, that I appreciated that she didn't just talk about the abuse, that she talked about, places where people were telling her that this was wrong. And she talks about the people that helped her along the way, So she's giving examples of what we can do for people that are in these situations. And you don't have to be a paid advocate to do that. You show up, you help them move, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, if she wants, if she answers me and says it's okay, I'm going to share her video on our Facebook page. But I didn't feel like, it is public, so you can go to her page and view it. But I just didn't feel like I wanted to do that without her permission. But anyway, it is so cool, because that's one of the things I've been doing just with my own Facebook page, but nobody relates to me anymore. And I talk about that, like the times in my life, I can remember there was this young man that, I was probably 12 years old or 13 years old. And and he was across the road. And back in those days, we were very much manual labor, and he was strong and tough, and had a very bad reputation for being violent. And he'd been picked up and thrown in jail for raping somebody. But his grandfather and his mom and that whole family were close friends of my family. You know, my grandfather had homesteaded out here. They had traded work back and forth, and knew everything about each other. And there was a lot of violence in those days, between neighbors and within families. And of course, my family had their own stories too. But I can remember his mother calling my house, or calling our house, and I can remember my uncle on the phone saying, you know, Ruby, I'd like to help you out, but I got kids here. I can't have somebody like him in the house. You know, just that, you know, what do you say? What do you say? What do you do? An older man was calling my house when I was a teenager. My Aunt Margaret got on the phone and was like, how old are you? You know, and it was just them kinds of things that I knew I was protected. You know, and how do we do that for other people? What are the steps? How do we do that? And we really need to start highlighting that kind of thing. They might just be simple things like, what are you doing with a teenage girl? You're an adult man, you know? It just can be some simple little things. But that's the kind of, I guess that's the bystander thing, right? But maybe we call it being a good relative.
That's an awesome segue too. Thank you, Carmen. That's, you know, we talked about a lot today and we are wrapping up here. So I want to give closing thoughts around the horn here. But the other piece of it, and you have to excuse my language, y'all, but sometimes we need to put on shit kickers, because when we're talking about being a bystander, not only for the survivor or the child or the victim, but also being a good community and family member too, that being a bystander to those we know that are doing wrong, just like Carmen just shared, like, what are you doing? You're not going to get away with it. And link arms with like-minded folks. These people, man, they have microphones and you know, all the things, the social media, the protection, the goons or whatever. And next week, we'll dig into that a little bit more in the men and boys section. With the disclaimer, we do understand that violence does happen to all genders, right? So yeah, we'll dig into that next week, same time. So I'm gonna stop now and just offer closing thoughts for everyone. And thank you, Carmen, so much for bringing that up.
I have one thought about that. I just want to say that if you don't have the courage, but in your gut you heard or you think or somebody told you, tell somebody and keep telling. Tell somebody listens and somebody helps. Just keep telling, even if you have to write it on something and give it to somebody, because that's the only way it's going to stop or be. You know, if you're for whatever reasons aren't brave enough, or you don't have the courage, or you've been threatened, or you're something, tell somebody who can tell.
Thank you for that, Linda. I agree. That made me think of a woman that I worked with, whose father was sexually abusing her. And she had told that when she was in school, she ended up having children. She kept telling. She moved to another state. She kept telling. And she fell through the cracks multiple times throughout her life. And she continued telling until somebody actually listened to her. And unfortunately, it took her years and years before someone heard her and did something about it, right? Not just an advocate, but also within the system. So teachers, relatives, all of those people had heard over and over again what she was saying, but did nothing. And it's terrible. It was terrible, terrible. horrible. And I really liked, I think Carmen, you might have said, it's about being a good relative. You know, and is that something we would want for ourselves or for our own children? So those are things that we need to think about. And I want to say thank you so much for opening this door to even begin to have these conversations. So I'm looking forward to the rest of the month. And absolutely, I think when we have that tribal think, Angelica, it is being a good relative. So, and as our Linda says, coming from a place of love, right? Thank you.
Yeah, I think my final thought or closing thought for this particular time is this idea of like, if we really love somebody, we're going to tell them the truth, right? That not like, I don't know what I really mean, except for when you love somebody, you just tell the truth. And people know in their heart, in their spirit, in their gut, what the truth is. And if there's something, you know, if the shoe fits, wear it. If it's not, then move on. But when you really love somebody, we have a responsibility as relatives to one another to say it. And the other person has to do the work, right? We can't do the work for somebody else. We all have to commit to being a thread in the web of life with one another. And yeah, I'm looking forward to more conversations. Miigwech.
That's so true. You know, I quoted the Beastie Boys, but the way you said it was way more eloquent and beautiful, and being the light. As a survivor myself from a very young age, know, like I'm not going to tear up. Everybody in my family knew. And no one intervened for myself, but also no one intervened for the perpetrator, the harm doer. And that stuck with me and gave me all kinds of lifelong trauma and trust issues, right? So we can learn new ways by talking about it for the first time and figure out how to be the light, not only as an advocate, but as a relative. Oh, Angelica, I saw you unmuted.
Yeah, the last few things that came to mind as we end our time together is, you know, if you're in a situation where you see, you know, violence happening, you know, if you're thinking about your safety plan, or if, let's say, you can at least stick around until, if you feel safe enough, stick around until the violence has ended, if you can't intervene for your own safety and others, but just to go up to that person who has experienced violence and ask them, are they okay? Do they need any support? You know, give them a number to reach you at, or social media. But just like, you know, Christine had said, just to know that someone is there and witnessed and seen you. To be seen and to be heard is really all that we want, and to feel the love. And again, it's that energy sharing. Another thing I can say is that, you know, just because a person maybe isn't ready to leave a situation, don't give up on keep trying. Don't give up on asking if they need support, just checking in with them, and create that safety plan with them if that is what they would like. But don't give up, and because, you know, that person will know that you're there for them and there's people in their corner. Sometimes we just got to be, you know, bosses and boss up and face our fears. With that being said, I just want to say miigwech to everyone. And this goes for the young folks too. You know, I'm in my early 20s, but we're the next people to step up and be, you know, we're going to be support standers. I don't know. We got to come up with a special word. But, you know, how are we going to deal with the, you know, trauma dealers, like Carmen had said? So miigwech everyone, and I'll pass it along to you, Rebecca.
Wopila. And Carmen, did you have any closing comments for today?
Oh, I probably just talked too much already, but thank you guys. It's just great having that conversation and seeing you guys, even if it is once a year, some of you. Thank you.
Awesome. So we did have a question on the Facebook Live. Are we going to be able to view this at another time? It will be permanently on our Facebook page and will also be uploaded to our website. And also just a friendly reminder for Native Month, every Wednesday, 2 Central, we will be on Facebook Live again. Next week is Men and Boys. The week after that is, I need my cheat sheet, isolated communities. That could be reservation, that can be Alaska Village or rural communities. And then 4 is going to be a really big one. That's going to be people with clout, influencers, politicians, administrations, leadership, and just popular folk, and talking about what that looks like. So thank you so much for the great conversation today. It's our first one. Celebrate your month, y'all. Wopila.
Miigwech for holding space for us, Rebecca. Miigwech. And our interpreters, thank you very much. Thank you very much.